There's a lot of old pilots here, as we all know. But this story might bring back some memories. And it starts off by saying, you think you've lived a good life and that you know what you're doing, then along comes someone and blows it all to hell. An old pilot sat down in the local coffee shop, ordered a cup of coffee, and as he sat there sipping it, a young woman sat down next to him. She turned to the pilot and asked, "Are you a real pilot?" And he replied, "Well," he said, "I've spent my whole life flying biplanes, Cubs, Stinsons, Staggerwings. In World War II, he said, I flew a B-29. And he said, I taught lots of people to fly and go rides to hundreds. So yes," he said, "I guess I am a pilot." And she said, "Well, I'm a lesbian." She said, "I spend my whole day thinking about naked women. As soon as I get up in the morning, I think about naked women. When I shower, I think about naked women. When I watch TV, that's what I think about. It seems that everything makes me think of naked women." So the two sat sipping their coffee in silence, each with their own thoughts, and you can imagine what the thoughts were in the case of the woman. But a little later, a young man sat down on the outside of the old pilot and asked, "Are you a real pilot?" And he thought for a bit, and he said, "Well, I always thought I was. Just found out I'm a lesbian."
Today we have a special guest who we've been keeping from you for the moment. Kevin Bailey has brought this person along. Kevin, would you like to introduce our special guest?
My wife and I have been very privileged to host a gentleman who is in the middle of achieving his boyhood dream of flying his beach staggering around the world. This man has done more than 33,000 hours of flying. He's been an absolute pleasure to have as a guest in our home. We've been blessed to go flying in his beautiful Staggerwing, and we've also been blessed to fly in formation with it, which is quite an experience, I can assure you. And I'd like to introduce this gentleman in front of me. His name is Mr. Bill Charney, and in flying circles he's known as Captain Biff Windsock.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin rang me earlier in the week and said, "Listen, I've got a special guest here. Do you think I could bring him along to the meeting?" And I said, "By all means, yes." I said, "Where's he from? What's it all about?" So he told me a little bit about Bill, and I said, "What about we make him our mini speaker of the day?" And Bill's agreed to that, so here he is. Bill's all wired up and ready to go.
I was going to tell a joke, but I'm not going to touch that one because I'm a lesbian too. That was really good grief. Here I am, 2,000 years old, and I'm still thinking about naked women. Anyway, indeed, my name is Bill Charney. I live in a storage unit in Reno, Nevada. That's on the western part of the U.S., about a 4-hour drive northeast of San Francisco. And by great luck, I have been the proud owner of a big red Staggerwing since 1994. So I'll first tell you about the airplane, which is the important part. The airplane's construction began in 1943. It was completed in January of 1944 under the original contract to the U.S. Navy. However, it never got sent there because it was shipped as a group of about 10 aircraft to the UK and flew with the Royal Navy for several years, from 44 onwards till about 1946, late 46 I believe it was. And then sometime in 1947 it was shipped back to the United States and went into the private ownership then. While it was in England, it served with the Royal Navy at what is today the Glasgow Airport, Scotland. That's probably not pronounced correctly, but then I used to say Melbourne too, and I've been taught to say Melbourne. So I am trainable at this old age. The Glasgow airport was called Royal Naval Air Station Abbotssinch, and the history of the airplane is known only because of the work of a wonderful Scottish gentleman who used to be an air traffic controller, oceanic controller, who lives in Ayr, not far from Prestwick and Glasgow. His name is Peter Barry. He's written a book about all the Staggerwings that were built that he could find, and each serial number. So the only reason I know what I've just told you is because of this Scottish chap named Peter Barry. The airplane went back into civilian life and in the United States. And lo and behold, when I was a kid, I crop dusted on an airfield in northern North Carolina, Madison and Mayodan. And the chap that owned the airport there was a wonderful man named Mr. Schultz. And you'll notice that, you can see on the bottom wing there, November Charlie 16 Sierra. Well, that S stands for Mr. Schultz. He owned that in his oil company, and he had a Mercedes Gullwing that he let me sit in. At the time that I was the young crop dusting pilot there, he didn't own this aircraft. He later bought it. But lo and behold, when I learned of the small world story that he later owned this airplane and I bought it, then I was quite amazed. Unfortunately, he had passed away by the time I got the airplane. Anyway, the airplane is it's a 5-passenger airplane, 2 seats in the front and a bench seat in the back, and is legal for 3 passengers in the back. It's a 32-foot wingspan. Empty weight is, well, since it's been rebuilt in New Zealand, it weighs more than this. It weighs about 3,000 pounds now. And the legal weight is 4,250 pounds, but the military used 4,800 pounds. I tend to lean towards that number. And let's see. It has a Pratt & Whitney R985 450 horsepower engine, which is a pretty good grunt. It's the same engine that's on the de Havilland Beaver and an aircraft that you're all familiar with, the Windshield. 985 cubic inches. Goes good. Cruise speed is indeed 200 miles an hour if you open your wallet very, very, very wide. It will do that. I cruise at 165 miles an hour. That is 145 knots or so, true airspeed. And that's economy cruise, and that burns about 22 US gallons an hour. About 85 liters an hour. That's economy cruise. The range is a tad more than that because I have 6 tanks in this airplane, and I sort of got ahead of myself. I did indeed buy the airplane in 1994, flew it around the U.S. several times, getting lost dramatically because I didn't have a GPS, and I always found my way somehow to an airfield. And but it was well worn. I had been going to New Zealand for a number of years to fly tiger moths and just visit New Zealand. Such a beautiful country. And long story short, I ended up shipping this aircraft to the Croydon Aircraft Company in Mandeville, New Zealand, for rebuild. And Mandeville is there, way at the bottom of the South Island, and they speak with a distinctly Scottish accent down there. It's not Gore, it's Gore. And I can't do that. But in any case, there's a wonderful little company down there that's very famous for rebuilding tiger moths. And I gave them the opportunity to learn a little bit about staggerwings. And when they got the container, opened it, and started undressing it, taking the fabric off, they just sort of gasped at how overbuilt the airplane was in comparison to a tiger moth. Same vintage, same era. 1932, November 32 is when this aircraft first flew. And as you know, the tiger moths flew about that same time. So very similar age to the aircraft, but an entirely different philosophy. A little bit about me. I have a background in the Army and Air National Guard. I was fortunate enough to go through the pilot training program for the Air National Guard. That's where the Air Guard sends you off to the Air Force, and they train you right along with the rest of the military pilots. But when you get your wings, you get to go back to the Air National Guard unit and do whatever you were doing before. In my case, I went back to university, but my very first airplane in the Air National Guard was an airplane that you would know, the Canberra, the American-built RB-57A Canberra. Photo reconnaissance version, got to fly low and pretty fast, doing low-level photographs, and then quite high. The airplane, I got it once to 50,000 feet, but I was scared stiff. It had a history of losing its canopy at high altitude, and so we didn't have pressure suits. And eventually, in my Air National Guard career, which went for 20 years, continuing a civilian life as well, I was recalled to active duty twice, once for the Berlin crisis and another time again. And that whole period I was flying for United Airlines. I had the great luck again for a Michigan farm boy, great luck, to get a job with United Airlines in February of 1961, and had my entire Air National Guard and military career at the same time. So how lucky can a farm boy get? New Zealand, if you haven't been to New Zealand, I know, you guys have a little rivalry with New Zealand, but it is one beautiful place. I'm sure that many of you have been to Wanaka. I've flown the Staggerwing at Wanaka numerous times, several times in the air show there. Beautiful place, and I've flown to most of it, including Milford Sound, way over here, a most beautiful place. The journey began last year, about Easter time, having flown it, after restoration, flew it around New Zealand for about 3 years, and then went to Norfolk Island, Lord Howe Island. What a magnificent place that is, and I believe their motto, the world's last paradise. I used to fly over Lord Howe and pointed out to 422 passengers at a time, and they were probably saying, "Who cares?" Well, I cared. It was a most magnificent pearl in the middle of the ocean with nothing around it except Ball's Pyramid to the south, a dramatic outcropping, nearly vertical, most beautiful part of the world. And it was a thrill to get there with the Staggerwing, even if the windsocks at each end of the runway were standing straight out in opposition. It was a scary moment. The journey has really just begun, as you can see. Someday soon, when I build up my courage, and actually I have a mission here. I'm trying to teach Mr. Bailey how to drink red wine.
He succeeded.
His nose is indeed turning red. We've been having some good times, and the rest of the journey will be up through Southeast Asia. And my main goal in that part of the journey is to get back to a place called Phu Cat in Vietnam. I was stationed there for a year, flying F-100s, and I would love to give a Young Eagle ride to a couple of kids from the little village off the end of the runway there that we used to annoy a great deal, I'm sure. If I could get that done, I'd really feel that my journey was complete. And then across India, across the Middle East to Europe, and I do plan to spend several years wandering around Europe if I can still afford it. And then eventually Scotland, Iceland, Greenland, and back into Canada and back out to the sleepy little village of Reno, Nevada. A gentleman sent me that photograph and I really liked it, and it just looked so good I thought you might enjoy it as well. That's the cockpit. Took a great deal. I had to lower all the instruments, or the boys at Croydon Aircraft Company had to lower all the instruments a row in order to fit in a Garmin 430, which didn't want to fit there. It was just too long. Took a good deal of maneuvering to build a place for it. That is a local picture. One day flying formation here with Kevin, and that's down near Mundajon. And this is a frightful moment coming into land. And there is Kevin, the beginning of Kevin Bailey's airfield. And what a delight that is. It's just been a joy and a privilege to be invited to a place like Kevin's by a gentleman like Kevin. Everything is perfection, and I'm almost embarrassed to have that next to his because there's a mark on the wing I can't get off. I've been working on that mark. Anyway, it really is a privilege, and thank you, Kevin. What a wonderful journey this has been. They look kind of neat together, don't they? That was the arrival day when he had a number of his friends with vintage automobiles, and I think it was 16 aircraft were there finally. Wow. And this was my arrival in Perth, and I'm overwhelmed. I'm just a Michigan farm boy. I'm just wandering the world in search of the perfect blueberry muffin. I am just overwhelmed by the hospitality here, and it's from people like you. Great big donk there. Two beautiful airplanes and a wonderful home. And that is something. I have one flight that I ferried a Stinson Gull wing from Reno, Nevada to Jackson, Mississippi, and it was just a delight. And thank you very, very much for having me. What a privilege.